State of the Union that happened last week, but there was a specific topic that Biden mentioned that is a policy analysis and outline that I put together with Jake several years ago. And my father was incredibly impressed and surprised this was mentioned. And it was not the defund the fund the police question. It was the securing the border question. So my father has been very dubious about the policy work that I've done for a bipartisan administration like Biden's, together with Jake. And so it's a little bit annoying to have my father question my abilities all the time. So Biden mentioned immigration in his State of the Union. He hit a lot of bipartisan issues and he hit them in a bipartisan way. It's really amazing to me to see him bringing together the sides, and the GOP is the one that's not on board. The GOP is the one that's being combative at the moment. And the two extremes, I will say that, because on the left we have the extremists who are being combative also against moderates, and Biden trying to hit a bipartisan moderate line. So he said he wanted to secure the borders, but he went on to mention working in country in the southern hemisphere. And that's what I want to get into. So he did mention securing the borders. So I want to give you my outline that I discussed with Jake and that I see him hitting on bullet points here. And since he's hitting on bullet points, I want to explain to you the outline that I put together about this that are reflected in the bullet points he mentioned in the State of the Union last week. So I recognize the problem in Texas and in the border states where all of this undocumented low-wage labor coming into the U.S. is an economic problem. It's basically the new slavery. The southern states during slavery were built on this economic system with low-cost labor. We see a lot of the descendants of these populations complaining that they were basically brought in for free labor for the agricultural economy set up by the colonies to grow sugar and cotton in these warm climate agricultural products at a very low cost, low overhead. So we don't want to return to that economic model. And it's hard to do when we have all of this undocumented labor coming across the borders. The businesses are able to undercut other businesses by acquiring all of this low-wage labor. So this should be a bipartisan issue. Trying to stop this low-wage labor should be a progressive and liberal issue as well. That's why the progressives who don't understand these economic issues, and if you watch my other videos, I harp on the progressive, ridiculous economic policies here a lot. So this is why the conservatives are focused on this issue. But this is a bipartisan issue. And liberals should care about not having a new slave labor economic business model in these border businesses, in these border states. Okay, so the debate has been, how do we handle the situation? And Trump actually closed down embassies, closed down. So usually in every country in the world, we have an embassy, and citizens who want to go there to apply for visas, even if it's asylum seeking, refugee status, there are centers in the countries where they can go and go through a normal process to apply. Trump closed those down. So Trump just declared war on South America. He said, well, I'm going to close down all of our centers so nobody can apply for these visas. And we have a lot of people in Venezuela. There are a lot of political refugees in some of these South American countries who legitimately are seeking asylum because their lives are at stake if they disagree with whatever political group or economic terrorist is in their specific country. So Trump closing down those makes the problem of them actually appearing at the border worse. So what we don't want, I think both sides would agree, that people just marching up to the border and crossing over is the problem. And not coming in with official documentation, coming in and just picking up unpaid labor jobs, creating the slavery economy. What I heard, and so what I've outlined as part of a fix for this situation is help work with the South American and Central American countries. Because somebody from Venezuela shouldn't have to come all the way to the US to find safety. That's a really long trek. Some of these people are not coming just from Mexico. And Mexico's a fairly large country top to bottom. So if they have to go through Mexico to get to the border, they're coming from places south of Mexico. They are coming a very long way for refuge and for assistance. So that's what he was talking about. Working with the countries, working with the Southern Hemisphere to make sure there are normal processes, that there are places more locally that people can go. They don't have to risk their lives crossing 1,000 miles to get to the United States border. Because by the time they've crossed 1,000 miles in fear of their lives and they're showing up at the United States border, then absolutely they're haven't eaten, they're tired, then they do need humanitarian assistance. So why don't we try to avoid the whole crisis if possible? Find other solutions that are local for them where they can find humanitarian aid and safety without making this life-threatening journey with their children just to try to stay safe. So I heard him, and that's what people don't see behind the bullet points of his State of the Union address, but that's what he was talking about, because that's what I've outlined and discussed with Jake. And so, yes, then if you don't have this crisis of these waves of people just showing up at your door, then it becomes much easier to secure the border, and you don't have the same humanitarian crisis that you have currently. Because the humanitarian crisis, where you have thousands of people showing up tired and hungry with their children in fear of their lives and being caged and separated. I mean, we have a humanitarian crisis at the border. Let's find ways to proactively prevent it in the future. So that's because I try to approach things of what is the overall big picture solution, the long-term solution. Yes, we have a humanitarian crisis at the border and we need to deal with that, but it is the symptom of the problem. What are the solutions for the root of the problem? And that starts in country, that starts in South America, that starts with American centers where people can apply through normal processes, staying open, functioning correctly. So definitely we need to have immigration reform. We need to have, and I've mentioned this, I think, in my voting rights video as well, for the Dreamers, we need to have natural processes where they can, or normal processes that work, where people from other country in a crisis can apply for asylum, where people who were brought to the country undocumented but lived here their whole lives can apply for citizenship. These things need to work correctly. This will trying to patch all of the symptoms of these problems, like, well, then why can't these people vote? Or why do we have this humanitarian crisis at the border? Is a symptom of the problem. Let's start to work to address the root of the problem. And that's what he was addressing. Those are the bullet points he was addressing in the State of the Union. And so since I was behind putting together that outline, I was a significant contributor. I wanted to make this video to explain what my ideas were that went into the ideas that were outlined in the State of the Union address on these issues. So my father was incredibly impressed and surprised. But as I said, when I talked to my father and said, look, here are the ideas I outlined that are going into this administration's policies on this, my father agreed. Like, okay, yes, absolutely. This problem of the underpaid workers is the economic problem. And that is a bipartisan problem. We should all be agreeing on that issue. So thanks for joining me. This is my moderate take. This is the moderate contribution that I've made to this moderate administration. The more people start to realize some of these ideas are addressing both sides of the issues, hopefully we can all start to become more unified.